Hey guys, Lax from Lax and Lokesh here with a quick uplifting trance tip on how to layer your mid basses. Now this particular tutorial will talk about the types of sounds you should select. In terms of processing and everything like that, we'll quickly go through that as well. But yeah, it comes down to the sounds you select and then the processing you put on them. So you'll see there's basically 4 layers here, which I'll go through and how they create the mid bass. And then I'll finally touch on just adding things around it, knowing how far to push your mid bass when you first start it, what it sounds like with processing, and then how to really finish off that drive with other elements, because it's not always just the mid bass. I see a lot of times in the past for us, we've tried to overcompensate with the mid bass. We've tried to make sure that it does everything for the bottom end or create that movement and drive that we want. But really, it's just a piece of the puzzle. So anyway, let's get straight into it. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to play these sounds. Now, there's processing on them. So, there's a bus here. There's individual, just basically has EQs on them. We'll talk about that one by one quickly. So let's just play the sounds with all the processing on. Okay, so you can see each sound does something very different, and we'll go through that one by one really quickly. So first of all, let's have a look at this sound, Inspire. We can see basically if we just play it, very, very small EQ on this, nothing really done at all. It's sort of your, or what I would call your proper mid, not your low mids, but your proper mids. It's got movement. That movement is coming from certain things, but it's moving around and it's giving us that movement that we want. This is pretty much just adding a little bit to the mid lows, a little bit of phasing, just making it sound nice. Now this one is much lower, as you can see. And this is your proper low end, which works really well with the sub. So with mid basses, what you really want to aim for is like different textures, I would say. Make sure there's different textures. You can clearly see we have one which really does the low drive, and then we have the other ones which create movement. So movement and drive, you can't have it too static. So this sound is quite static, but if I add the other moving element to the top, so just them two together, you can see they make up quite a big meat of the sound. You kind of want to make sure that you have sort of 1 or 2 layers which are sort of your main layers, and then the other ones are just sort of helping those layers accomplish what I would call filling out the spectrum. So if we have a look here, I'm just going to turn off all of the processing. I'll leave that on, utility, we can probably just turn that off. So if I play these now, that's the first sound. I go into it. A little bit of phasing on this patch. No reverb, no delay. Sorry, there's no phasing on this either, but you can see it's kind of got a little bit of movement to it. And that's just because of the way that this is set up. There's a little bit of detune there. You can see the waveform is a little bit different, unique waveform. And it's just creating that little bit of movement. I mean, this sounds like nothing, really. But it's a good layer. It's actually an audio layer. It's good to have one of those sometimes from audio packs in there as well. This one is from Activa Trance Essentials. Sometimes it's good to layer that because some of the audio packs that you buy, they will have a really, really strong layer already processed for you. You can just put that straight in there. This one's a little bit more gritty, but it kind of fills the space that the other sounds don't fill. So if we look at, say, this one, nice and thick, just gives it that little bit of extra space. And that one gives it a little bit, just something different. Oh, sorry. And we can see that together creates mid-bass. Now, the low mids is actually in this particular track, we've kind of left it to it's separately. It's really got its own separate processing because we felt like it was quite different because these three clearly belong together. This is what I would call is your mid bass. Now, if we look at this on the Voxengo Span, you want your mid basses to kind of do this, where it starts off heavy on the bottom and then just rounds off. You don't want too many frequencies here because that's where your leads should sit. It should always give you that kind of curve where it has a meaty bottom and then a curve down. That's really how your mid bass should be. You know, if I put the other layer into it, you know, that's a really good mid bass layer layering, and that you can see it's leaving a lot of that area for the high elements, which it should, and this area. So always remember that curve. Now, if I turn all the processing on, now it's just thickened it up. So sometimes it's about finding the right sounds. I would say first, making sure that they blend together, making sure they fill the frequencies out, and they're all unique in themselves, and then processing them later. Always go for one or two main key sounds for the mid bass, and then everything else should just be an additional help. And then aim for this curve. Now, I'll give you a little trick. What's actually made this quite punchy or quite thick is a saturator. A saturator on the top mid bass, we use the black box. Turn it off. See, it makes a massive difference because saturation adds frequency. But you only want to do this once you know your layers. And I would say, you know, if you get stuck and you don't like the layers, turn all the processing off, make sure the layers sound good, and then start putting processing on. And just make them fit. And don't worry about trying to make them sound really thick or really heavy and, you know, trying to cut through the mix initially. Just make sure that they work well together in layering and then process. So that's just cleaning up some bottom frequency. Just adding a little bit more high. The type of balance you'll get from a mid bass, it's a long sort of conversation, but yeah, this is kind of like just like a side chainy kind of tool. And yeah, that's how you do your mid basses. Now, if we play it with the kick, sub and the mid bass together. And that's all it really needs to be. Doesn't need to be anything else. I'm just going to show you quickly this acid layer because it makes up the entire drive. And these acid layers, just to give you a window on what I mean by the mid bass doesn't have to do everything. These layers are the ones that really come in and start making the movement happen. We play them all together. So the main thing is these are kind of acting like extra mid basses almost. They're called sequence patches. I would highly recommend you use them. Inspire, you can find for drive or sequence depending on the guys you get it from. But they just kind of chug the track along. Because if I play these with the mid bass, I would say that is your bottom end drive. That's everything. That's what you want. So in our particular style, that's how it's made in Uplifting Trance. We like to add a little bit of that, but I would say, layer mid basses, because that mid bass is really just meant to chug the track along. But it's also about layering your acids or sequences on top of that. You might use ARPs instead to fill the space and really create that speedy movement that you want. But keep experimenting and you'll get there. That's it for today. We'll be back later with some more in-depth tutorials. We're just still trying to find our feet and how we do these things. I'm sure they'll improve over time. But if you have stayed this far, I thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to put them into the comments and I will be happy to answer them for you. All right, guys, happy producing. See you next time.